Hello, everybody. I'm Jinny Alexander, and I'm here today to have a chat to my fabulous narrator of Claude, Gord, Alice, and Maud, Helen Lloyd, who I met a few years ago when we did a creative writing MA together. So, Helen, if you're there, come on in.
I'm here. I'm here.
Hello. How
Hi,
lovely
Jenny.
to
How are
see you
you?
again.
It's lovely to
I'm
see you
I'm
too.
grand.
We've never actually
So
met in person either, have we? Everything we did was online.
everything we did was online, and even through the MA we weren't really in the same group, but we sometimes had tutorial webinars together, and that's
What?
how I remembered that you did the audio, because our tutors always
Yes,
made you do the
do
sample
the reading.
reading
It's
because you
quite
did the voices
spooky.
better than anybody else. The reason I contacted Helen was to pick her brains about audio, because Claude, Gord, Alice, and Maud is it's part of a new series. The main character is Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith is visually impaired. So I was really determined to make the book fully accessible, and I wanted to get an audio version done as soon as possible. And I thought, who do I know who can point me in the right direction and tell me how I make this happen? So I sent an email out to Helen through our MA, whatever it was,
Email.
through the
Yes.
email. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yes.
And didn't know if it would get to you, because by then I'd finished the course
Yeah.
and a lot of my access to all of those resources had been stopped, and I had to go through the whole login again because I'd been thrown off all of the logins, and it was like throwing it out in a message in a bottle, really. I thought, firstly, will she get it? Secondly, will she remember me? Thirdly, will she be interested? Fourthly, is she too busy being called upon to narrate all of the webinar material for the new cohorts in the MA? And then,
No, I
of
haven't
course,
done any of that.
and then you responded straight away, and we had a chat, and I was telling you about Mrs. Smith and the book. And then I just casually said, if you want to beta read the book, I'll send it over. And of course, you said yes. And then it kind
Well,
of very
this
quickly.
it's interesting because I mean, I get to read, I mean, I get to read a lot of books. I mean, I have read an awful lot of books, not just the MA books, most of which are still sitting on the shelf and I will sell at some point because I never ever want to look at them again. Um, but I also get to read books, and there are so many that you read, you narrate, and they go in one ear and out of the other. They don't stick, and it's sometimes you get a book where the particularly the protagonist, the main character, really chimes, really kind of feels like you. And although I am actually older than Mrs. Smith, I must point out that
Yes, but you
Goddard
act
is
a lot
able.
younger. Mrs. Smith is quite old for her age
She
because
is old
she's
for
had
her.
a hard life being a
Yes,
retired head teacher
yes,
and all of that.
I think if I'd been a teacher for 40 years with somebody like Doofus Finbury in my class, I might be old and doddery as well. But anyway, yeah, she resonated with me, and and I laughed out loud. And I really, that doesn't happen very often, that a book goes. And I could hear my voice reading it. And I thought, I'm not going to let anybody else do this. If I know this is my book. This has got my name on it. When I'm reading a mystery, whether it be a cozy mystery or a traditional thriller, excuse me, when I'm prepping, because obviously I've got to read the whole book before I start. Otherwise, the person from pick a place at random, any place, Uzbekistan, that I decide to make from Uzbekistan, and then it suddenly turns out in chapter 467 that they come from Wigan, I've got to re-record the whole thing. So I always read the entire book in advance. But in a mystery or a murder mystery, I never read the last three chapters in advance.
I'm trying to remember which chapter the reveal comes in.
I can't remember either. But
I
even
think I think it is in the second from last, I think, but I'm not sure.
that's usually when it happens. You have lots of suspicions up to that point. Because the point is, if you know on page one who done it, you either, as a narrator, you either overcompensate and make them overly innocent,
Hmm.
or you somehow edge. There's an edge in the voice.
Oh,
There's
that's
something
really
in the voice that gives
interesting.
them away. So I
Wow.
like to be as surprised as the rest of the listeners when I get to the reveal. So I'm sitting there in my little box, my little soundproof cell going, oh my God, it's her. I never thought it was. Oh my goodness me, I never thought it was them.
It always really surprises me when somebody tells me that they guessed who the murderer was in any of my books when they guessed early on, because I didn't know early on. I very, very rarely know who the killer
You're
is
making it up
until
as you
quite
go
near the
along,
end.
aren't you?
Yeah, I mean that's what authors do. We make things up.
Yeah.
But I'm not really a plotter. I usually know who's died. I usually have a clue about how or why they've died, but I very, very, very rarely know who has actually killed them. Because the same as you, I think. I think if I know too early on,
Yes, you give the game away.
you give the game
Yeah, yeah,
away.
yeah.
You don't, yeah, I mean, you kind of have to then convince yourself that you don't really like the character because they're the
Yes,
bad guy. I've shot myself totally in the foot with this Mrs. Smith's Suspects series because each book will have the four names of the main suspects as the book's title. So we already know from the start that it's got to be one of those four. The catch with that is that I also have to then make it be one of those four. And it's incredibly hard, I've now realised, far too late after I've committed down this road. I liked Claude, Gord, Alice, and Maud. I liked every single one of them, and I suddenly had to make one of them the bad guy. And I'm
well,
going to have to do it again in the
no,
next
no, you don't.
book.
No, just come about. No, just do it from the other direction. Write the book, then create the title when you've done it and make it right then. Don't think about it. It just becomes Mrs. Smith's Suspects 2 when you start. You write the book, you discover it's Ed, Fred, Ned, or
You're so close. It's going,
Alfred.
I think, at the moment, I think it's going to be Jen, Ren, Dwayne, and Gwen. But I want it to be Glenn, but I don't have a picture of Glenn. So
No.
I either need
So
to get a different picture.
I think you should ignore. I think it should just be Mrs. Smith Suspects 2, and you write the story with maybe two, three options of rhyming names, and then you
I've got a
only.
long list of
I'm
rhyming
sure
names
you
up my
have.
sleeve.
So you only decide right at the very end when the murder has been committed, when Mrs. Smith has solved who the murderer is. Only at that point do you decide what the title is. That takes the pressure off altogether.
So I was going to ask you who was your favourite character to narrate?
I think of the secondary characters. I mean, Mrs. Smith. I kind of identified with.
Well,
I
she's
love.
you, so I
I
mean,
did. Thank you so much.
only far
Oh,
dodgier than
yeah,
you.
yes, yes. Far, far, far more doddery than me. I like Mrs. I did like Phyllis a lot. I love doing Irish characters. My great grandmother was Irish. My father was Welsh and my mother was Scottish. So I've got the whole Celtic bit kind of
Mm.
mellowing. And I kind of, she just sounded Irish to me in my head.
That's
She
been one
sounded,
of the most interesting things for me, having now worked with you and you having done the audio. I don't think I realised that Phyllis was Irish until you told me Phyllis was Irish. I can't even talk anymore until you told me Phyllis was Irish.
she
And
just read as Irish. She just,
yeah, and I mean there were clues that
yes.
I had scattered in, but I again maybe it's back to that thing that I'm not great at accents and I hadn't really put two and two together. But
Mm.
there were clues that you'd obviously picked up on, taken, oh, she's Irish and run with it. So now I know she's Irish and now I can use that more going forwards.
I like Phyllis. I liked all the characters. I liked the Liverpudlian one. I can't remember her
Oh,
name.
Josephine.
Josephine. I like Josephine. And Claude and Gord. I mean, in a way, Gord hardly appeared in this one. I liked them. I liked their relationship. I liked all of them. I thought your policewoman.
Oh,
I
Dr. Sana, Detective Sana Nasir.
Yes. So I mean, she obviously has Asian heritage, but I didn't give her any kind of accent necessarily. But I wondered whether and I wanted to ask you, is it going to be like Miss Marple or Morse or any of the others, where it's always the same detective, or are you going to have different detectives?
Spoiler alert, I have started writing book two and Doofus Finbury has already showed up. I think that I want to build on Sana's character because I also like her.
Yes.
And I think she will come back in. She hasn't come back in yet, but I feel that she's a character who might grow quite nicely,
Yeah.
but as a very almost a secondary character, a tertiary character
Yes.
perhaps.
Yes.
But I think she will come back in, and I think it is a small town. I
You,
do think a lot of cozies are still stuck in that mindset of maybe 20, 30, 40
yeah.
years ago, even though the world's moved on. I think our heads haven't because we want it to still be
Right.
that,
But the truth of the matter is that the local police station will have closed down completely.
of course.
The police will have been called in from the nearest big town,
And
and
then they won't turn up because they'll be too busy with something else. I was going to suggest we listen to a little clip of Phyllis and Sally Smith having a
oh, I think
chat.
that's a great idea.
Um, I picked a bit that has Phyllis because I know readers love Phyllis. So if I share my screen. Okay, so this is a little section where the murder has happened. Of course, the murder happens on page one. That's no surprise. And Sally Smith is trying to work out what's going on, and she's asking her friend Phyllis. And this is Helen Lloyd working her magic with the fabulous, fabulous voice of not only Sally Smith, who sounds just like Helen, because Helen and Sally, I think, probably were separated at birth, but also the wonderful Irish Phyllis. So here we go.
With all three police officers momentarily detained, the murmur in the salon rose to an excited hubbub as people hastily compared theories in hushed but feverish whispers. Phyllis, taking advantage of the situation, shuffled her chair until it lined up with the space between our dividing mirrors and hissed through the gap until I turned my head accurately towards her. "Where are you, Phil? Am I looking the right way? It's terribly difficult to pinpoint you amongst all this hoo-ha." "A little to your right. You're staring at the mirror still. That's it, I'm just here. But now you've found me, turn your head a little so you can hear me properly. Listen, Claude said there was a lot of blood. He also said he was in the cupboard this morning, as he needed to get the potions ready for the client before me and for my tint. I do like how he calls it potions, as if we were in a witch's lair, don't you? About 10:30, I think he said, after his first client left, anyway, and then again after the one before me. His last before lunch, that is. So he thinks maybe around 11:45 at a guess. He was garbling a bit. She took a little breath and gave a funny half-giggle, as if she realized she might be gobbling too, but I did appreciate her cramming in as much information as she could, and I'm quite used to her. Go on, Phil, go on. He's worried about what this might do to his business. He didn't have anything good to say about Robertson, I can tell you. Said the man's a cheat and a swindler while he was tidying up my hair, and it didn't sound as if they were on friendly terms at all. Do you think Claude might have killed him? I wouldn't think it of Claude, but he is very tall, so you never can tell.
I love that bit so much.
I love the fact that only tall people can be murderers.
I mean, I suppose this is back to what you're saying about I'd made them a little on the doddery.
I do.
I love that it still makes me laugh when I listen to it as well. I mean, you said about you'd want to do the narration because it made you laugh. I mean, it actually makes me laugh when I listen to you reading it because it's almost like it's become your work. If I
Well,
read it, I probably wouldn't
that's
laugh aloud. But
that's a
because I'm
really
listening and
good
it's
point.
yours.
Yes. I think one of the most difficult things as an author is to hand over your baby, which is what you're doing, to somebody else and saying, okay, you're the nursery school teacher. You take the baby on for the day. And when you give it back to me, it might be wearing completely different clothes from the ones
Yeah,
I expect it to be in, because you can't, an author can't really micromanage. And if they do micromanage, they don't get the book that they want because it becomes too rigid, it becomes too controlled. You have to trust the narrator that is doing it to do it. And they may not do it quite as the voice in your head, but you can't control that because it is in a way it becomes theirs.
yeah. And the good thing about that is it's almost like, okay, so now you get it for primary school, I get it back for high school, and then you get it back for university. And it is just, we're building it
Yes,
together
yes.
now.
And that's
It's,
one of the things, and I hate to mention it because it's on the agenda at the moment, that AI cannot do. Because
oh,
there are a lot of authors, particularly self-published
yes,
authors, who are being tempted down the route of, you can do an audiobook, you can do it in half the time, it'll cost you half as much, it
mm,
won't cost you very much at all. You
no,
can do it for, you can do it and you'll get it back in 2 weeks and it will be AI and it'll all be wonderful and nobody will know. Yes, they will know because the you can't make you can't make an AI weep, and
no.
audiobooks can make you weep. And you don't
I
get
think we should
that.
have a whole conversation about this another time. I've been quite vocal on my Facebook page about how against AI for any kind of art
Yeah,
I am. And I mean writing,
yeah, front
visual
cover.
art,
Yeah,
narration art, cover art.
yeah.
And like you say, a lot of authors are using it, but I've got far too much to say on this. I mean, I thought we'd chat for 10 minutes.
Well, maybe we've got 2 videos here, or maybe even 3.
Definitely. And I think it's something we should do again. I think we've got a lot to say.
I think we have. But AI is, I mean, what makes me cross as a narrator?